Hello and welcome back to my channel, and in this video we're going to be speaking about the lifespan and longevity and progression for a first team analyst. Okay, so I'm going to use the word analyst, but I actually mean solely first team analyst as in more of a video analyst rather than a data analyst. So I'm going to base this video on, I've done videos on this role in the past. So the kind of analyst that will travel with a team, they will film, they will code, they will do presentations pre-match and all that sort of stuff. So that's the analyst that I'm talking about when I refer to analyst in this video. So this video comes on the back of an idea or a post that I had on LinkedIn, actually, that I put out a couple of months ago. So if you're not following me on LinkedIn, please do. Sometimes I do drop some interesting posts on there. But anyway, I had a random thought of how many of the people that were analysts back when I was an analyst, how many of those guys are still in that same role. So this is going back over 10 years, actually, which is a shame, but it was a long time since I did that role. And when I was at that point in my career, obviously, I was looking at who was in the clubs at that time. I was reaching out to them for jobs. I was connecting with them. Then when I was working, I was obviously meeting them in a different club. So I wanted to know how many of those kind of people are still in that position, or what have they done with their career so far? Have they stuck as an analyst, or are they still doing the same thing? Have they moved on to a different role within the club or another club? Have they stayed in sport, but they've moved to a different organization, maybe the private sector or whatever? Or are they totally outside of the world of football or sport altogether? Have they just totally moved to a normal job, so to speak? So it was interesting after doing some thought and obviously kind of thinking back to certain people and stuff to notice that the majority of analysts that were analysts back then are no longer analysts now. Okay, so let's talk about the duration first of all then. So as I mentioned, I'm going back about 10 years here. So if you imagine the first team analyst is normally a young person's job, not all the time, but it's normally somebody that has come out of university, they've maybe started with an internship and they've got themselves a job, they've got themselves a job straight away if they're lucky. So if you think about that kind of person, they're going to be sort of very early 20s when they get in that position. So they're going to be very excited. They're going to be traveling a lot. You know, they're going to be young, full of energy, usually. But then as that person then gets older and they've been in the job more, you know, some people start to fade away. Maybe they get fed up of the traveling. Maybe they just get bored. Maybe they, you know, get a family as they get older and they're sick of spending time away from them. So there's a few reasons why that might be. And I don't want to paint the picture of an analyst as being all doom and gloom.
It's not all doom and gloom.
There's obviously lots of positives, and I have a video on that as well, which will be linked down below. But in terms of the reasons why an analyst might want to either move on to something else or just move totally out of sport, those are the kind of reasons that I can think of that seem to be the popular ones. So if you imagine you get the job in your early 20s, obviously life changes, commitments change, you know, your desires change, etc. So when you get to around 30, you'll have been in there in that particular role for 10 years, which is a very long time. So for some, that 10 years is too long. So, and to be honest, I know people that don't even last anywhere near that. And that's not to say they are just not as good. They just have different priorities, and maybe it's not what they expected when they first went into it. So what I want to speak about now is the actual progression. So what can you, if you're an analyst or you're looking to be an analyst, what have you got kind of in the future that you can move on to? What's a natural progression as a job? So the first thing that comes to mind is to head or shift over into the scouting side of things. So as an analyst, you normally become, you know, an absolute mound of information based on, you know, players in your league, different teams, etc. So the natural progression with all of that knowledge is to then be a scout or be part of the scouting department. So I know a lot of first team analysts that shifted across to be recruitment analysts and scouts and things like that. And then that then comes with its own progression, because I think as a first team analyst, and then you have the kind of head of performance analysis, that is almost the top when you just kind of limiting it to analysis. There's not, especially in a club anyway, there's not really anyone above that outside of analysis. You have to then go to director of football, which again would be a progression that you can eventually get to, but you need to build up other skills along the way. So that move over to scouting, obviously that is a popular move. I see a lot of analysts do this. And I know some analysts that have then gone on from there, from being a first team analyst to a recruitment analyst, then potentially a head of recruitment. So an example of this is I had a video on my channel with Andy Belk at QPR. He did exactly this. So he was a first team analyst and he's now actually the head of recruitment at QPR. So if you want to check that out, that will also be linked down below. And then there's also things like director of football roles or technical directors. You may have heard of the role being called or referred to. So that's another position that you can have if you build up these skills over time. So normally those positions are filled with more experienced people, so a little bit older, but that gives you the time to build up those skills. But also you'll see that they normally come from people that have been in football for a long time. So you can imagine you started off as an analyst then over a 10 to 15 year period, you've done analysis, you've done recruitment, you've built all of your skill set and your network, you're then probably in a better position to be a director of football or a technical director or something equivalent. Okay, so that's the kind of main, if you want to stay in football, those are the main things I would say, kind of shift over to kind of the scouting and then kind of head it up. Another example that I had, which is another interview on my channel actually, with Chris Connolly, who was an analyst with EIS with the Great Britain boxing team. So he started off as an analyst. He is now, since we had the conversation, he's now head of performance at England Boxing. So that's more of a director role. So it's it's a more senior role. And he would then oversee analysis as one part, but also then, potentially sports science, things like anything else that makes up the backroom team of those particular boxing. So he's built up those skills over time. Again, he's put the graft in and worked a long number of years to be able to build those skills. And when I spoke to him, actually, he kind of had that as a plan all along. So it was a case of, I'm seeing an end to my analyst career. I want to move on. So then what can I do then to put myself in the best position to get the job that I want after this? So that is the next thing I want to kind of speak about, is that progression and having the foresight to understand you don't just want to get into an analyst job, think that you've made it and then just coast along. You do want to be learning all the time. And that's not to say that you just want to get an analyst job and move on to something else. When you are an analyst, there's so many things. It's one of them things that you don't know what you don't know. So if you're not networking and learning from other people, you will then end up coasting, and before you know it, you'll be actually far behind other people that are kind of on top of their game. So I think it's very, very important to network, kind of always be learning. Don't just be stagnant and be stale. And then those skills that you're learning can then obviously benefit you later on in your career. But if you do have a bit of a plan and you think that, I'm an analyst now, in 5-10 years time, I do want to be a director of football, let's say, then I would probably start thinking about that right away in terms of what skills would you need to be a director of football. So doing the analysis is great. That's kind of one skill set and all of that. You might then think, okay, in a couple of years, I want to make the transition. I want to be on the scouting team. I want to learn about that. So you can do that. If you're proactive about doing that, picking up the skills, it's then going to be a case of you will then have a choice of different roles to transition to, rather than just kind of coasting along and get what you're given or be stuck in a job that you're a little bit fed up with. Okay, so before I move on, I just want to quickly ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also consider giving the video a like if you're finding value from this video. So as I mentioned, there's loads of other videos on this channel where I interview analysts that have actually done the specific pathways that I'm talking about. So if you want to learn from people that have been in that situation, then this channel's perfect for that. So please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. Okay, so the next kind of next move would be to be out of football. Let's say you're in a club, you're just fed up of football, you don't like it for whatever reason. A lot of people have come to that conclusion and they may want to move out. So some analysts, which quite a few analysts, may move to kind of different software companies. So kind of InPlay being one of them, to be honest. So they might move out to be more of a consultant that helps teams. They might work in a sales role that deals with software, all of that sort of stuff. So, and the reason for that is, I say, it's more of a potentially more balance in terms of work-life balance, if you want to call it that, in terms of not technically going and doing as much traveling, although you still would do some traveling. You might get more time back yourself, and potentially you've got then the opportunity to earn a little bit more money depending on what role you were in first off. So you've got the opportunity then, or the option, to move outside of football, or still in football, but outside of the club setting, more of a sales position, a customer service, but it's still in that sector that you know about in analysis, basically. So that's one thing. But then I do know people that have totally moved out altogether. And that would be just moving on to what we call a normal job. So just anything outside of sport, really. So there's lots of people that have done that. And again, that's nothing against those guys. They've obviously had different priorities and they didn't, find what they were looking for in the role that they're in. So they moved out of sport altogether. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. So just on that, actually going back to the LinkedIn post that I mentioned at the start of this video, there were people on there that, left comments underneath, which popped up on the screen. Either they'll pop up now or they popped up earlier. Those were from people that were either still involved after 9-10 years, which again, then people do exist. But then there were people on there that have moved and they're totally outside of football or sport altogether. So it was interesting to get that kind of reasoning as to why someone would move out, what they're doing now. Another kind of transition that I've not mentioned is more to the data side. So we know how big data is getting within sport now. So as a first team analyst, as I mentioned, that's what I'm basing this video off. You will have to deal with data. You're probably, you're not necessarily a data expert, but if you then dip your toe in and you find that it's something that you are really into, you think you can get a career in that. If you then hone your skills on that, you can then move towards a more data related role within the club, but also then you're opening yourself out to being, accessing data roles outside of football or outside of sport altogether, which again can pay a lot more. So that's another area that you could potentially learn skills for, with the plan of moving on to in the end. So that's it for this video. So I hope it was useful. So as I say, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We have some good interviews coming up with more guests. So hope to see you for them videos too. So thanks again for watching and have a great day.